Welcome back, Honors. Welcome back to it. Welcome back to your flipped classroom and our continuing discussion of the unification of Germany. Well, actually, not even really a continuing discussion. We just left off on this, right? We left off in our last class talking about this, and I did not give you all a flip from homework, mostly due to the fact because I knew you were going to have to do a flip this Thursday because I'm not there, of course, right? Sorry about that, but I have a couple of appointments, and somebody's finally coming to pick up my car and a bunch of other stuff, so I just was unable to make it into school today. But go ahead and bang this flip out today in class if you have time, or if you want to go ahead and do like half of it now and half of it later. It's really up to you, but your study guide is also available and ready for you to do as well. But there's no point that you should be doing any work other than work for this class. Do we understand each other? Now, really quick though, going into it, we are going to start off on this entire story of the unification of Germany, right? And just to give you a heads up, this Prezi, when I made it back in the day, I changed up the format a little bit, so to give you a little bit of a heads up, basically anything that has a star next to it means it's going to be a title in your notes, okay? It's a title in your notes if it has a star next to it. So starting off with our first title, how nationalism is going to create the country that you now know of as Germany, right? Well, the thing about that we need to understand is that Germany, or German-speaking people, have existed for a very long time, long before nationalism kicks in the 1800s. Because do we all remember the Middle Ages? Good times in the Middle Ages, right? The Middle Ages are bleh. I hate the Middle Ages, but going into it, you have to understand that they're going to be an important point of context for us because we've been talking about these people that you refer to as Germans since then, right? Since Unit 3 of this year, we have brought up random people in this entire progression of European history that have spoke German or been German people, right? The thing about it, though, is that they didn't live in a country that you use of in the modern sense. They didn't live in a country at the time called Germany. They lived in a place called the Holy Roman Empire that existed from 800 to 1806 AD. This thing right here, highlighted in yellow, lived for 1,000 years in European history, and the bulk of it was made up of this chunk right here that is now modern-day Germany, right? So most of the people that lived inside of that yellow area were German-speaking people. And before Napoleon, this thing was the giant mashup of German-speaking states that sat in the middle of the continent. Did a lot of different things. It was like very permanently weakened after the 30 Years' War. But basically what I'm getting at is the German language and German-speaking people have existed for a very long time, long before the country of Germany existed. But when we look at the map of Europe, we have to understand in particular that if Germany is going to unify, it's going to do it through one of two groups of people, right? Because there are two very strong German-speaking states as of Napoleon's second exile in 1815, and as of all these revolutions that broke out in 1848. And those two strong German-speaking states are the following. It is Austria and Prussia, right? Not Russia, okay? Not Russia, Prussia, all right? And I know for a fact that Victoria McCann knows this because she answered this in class the other day, right? Not Russia, Prussia, all right? Prussia is very important, and they were a strong German-speaking state that actually existed during this time period, long before Germany was ever actually a country, okay? But again, not Russia, Prussia, all right? So Prussia is this area that's actually highlighted in blue right here, taking up some different areas of what you now consider Poland, and then also Eastern Germany, right? With a very, very big famous city in the middle of it known as Berlin. So going into it, you have to understand that Prussia, this area highlighted in blue right here, is going to be the area, country, territory, place, nation, kingdom at the time, that is going to be responsible for expanding into what you now know of as the country of Germany, right? And you can even see that on this map, right? All the little green areas are territories they acquired at first, then the blue areas they're going to gobble up, and then the yellow areas come in last, because we have the expansion of Prussia from 1807 to 1871. Prussia will gobble up all this territory and turn into what you now know of as Germany. And the thing about it, though, is who ruins everything and actually ended up creating Germany unintentionally? It all boils down to one thing. That's why I always teach this class, or when I teach this class, I say we might as well be saying that European history existed in two phases, the years before Napoleon and the years after Napoleon. Because Napoleon, his troops, his enforcement, and also his military conquest is going to plant the seed inside of German-speaking people that they should be one united country, right? Because the Napoleonic Wars, also known as the Wars of the Coalitions, are going to set up this issue where Napoleon and his occupying troops are going to inspire nationalism in these areas, okay? So to give you a heads up of how that works and where that really cooks into that is basically when Napoleon took over this area out here in the middle that at the time was known as the Holy Roman Empire. But when he took it over, he destroyed it gobbled up some of the territory into the French Empire, but then also called it the Confederation of the Rhine, and used Prussia and the Austrians as puppet states, right? But all these people here in this periwinkle color and this light blue color speak what you know of as German, right? And whenever they were being occupied by Napoleon, all of his troops were French, right? And so when he was using occupying forces and these French soldiers were living in areas where people spoke German, these French soldiers wanted things, right? They wanted German baked goods. They wanted, or excuse me, let me say it again. These French soldiers wanted things, right? They wanted French baked goods. They wanted French foods. They wanted French stuff. But the Germans were sitting there being like, well, we don't do that, right? We don't speak that language. We don't do those things. We actually have German goods and German quality and German things that unite us all together and make us all very similar and make us all very unique and make us all very proud of this heritage, right? So his unintentional combining of all this stuff is gonna lead all these German-speaking people to being proud of their genius and wanting a unified country, right? A lot of historians argue that the beginning of German unification started when Napoleon destroyed the Holy Roman Empire and began paving the way to a central area known as the country of Germany, right? Now, the thing that you also have to understand is that the Congress of Vienna is going to play an important place in this also, right? Because at the Congress of Vienna, several different countries get invited to that big meeting. Remember, also, asterisk means title. Asterisk means title. At the Congress of Vienna, what's going to end up happening is a bunch of countries are going to be called to the table for a meeting, right? The Congress of Vienna is going to discuss creating a unified Germany, but they think that it's not a good idea because it's going to make either Prussia or Austria too strong, right? The problem with creating a unified Germany was it was going to throw off that thing that we talked about in the middle of this unit known as the balance of power, right? They wanted to keep it, or many of the countries at the table of this meeting wanted to keep it Austria and Prussia, and then all those other little states in the middle, right? But you can't give those states to either one of them because, yet again, it's going to make them too strong. So the German Confederation was formed after the fallout of Napoleon and after he was exiled the second time. Everything right there in dark green is a member states of the German Confederation. Now, you'll notice that areas of Prussia and areas of Austria are inside of this new thing called the German Confederation because it's basically just the Holy Roman Empire part 2.0. But then a guy comes along named Otto von Bismarck, who's going to decide that this is not the way to go, and he wants to see Germany unified under one bannerment, one flag, one culture, one language, one credo. Then fast forward to the revolutions of 1848 after the Congress of Vienna, looking back at the big thing that we just talked about, when 17 different revolutions built barricades all over the continent of Europe and broke out in places ranging from France all the way to the eastern reaches of Hungary and also even Poland, or modern-day Poland. What you're going to see here is that a German politician in the wake of all these failed revolutions named Otto von Bismarck, who is the Chancellor of Prussia, wants to unite the German states together with Prussia being their leader because he felt like it. All right, so yeah, and he felt like it because he thought that a combined force of all these German-speaking people, and inspired by the nationalism movement that was growing in Europe during the 1800s, he thought it was not only an achievable goal, but he thought it was the right goal to pursue, right? So when we look at this, you have to understand that that is a t-shirt that I've been wanting for years. All right, now, you have to understand he's how he's going to do this, right? And he does this using two specific, really, really aggressive tactics, right? One, you have to understand, is that Otto von Bismarck is a master of this thing known as realpolitik, right? Now, realpolitik means realistic politics, okay? Or it's basically the idea of answering or using political power and prominence to answer modern-day questions quickly, right? It's anti-romantic. It's very practical, okay? Realistic politics based on real current needs. Now, he saw this in his pragmatism, or his really, really good job at being a politician. We're going to see this exposed one time whenever he gives a big speech, right? An example of his ability of realpolitik was this speech that he gave called the Bluteisen speech, right? And Bluteisen in German means blood and iron, right? It actually is Blut und Eisen, but still. So this speech that he gave to the very, very large group of German Confederates and also the German Landtag that was actually around at the time called for the authority of the military and strength, because in a very famous quote in this speech, he said, Germany, or the answers of the day, will not be solved by pen and paper. They will be answered simply by blood and iron, right? And he was advocating for military strength, which is a very, very big thing in Prussian tradition, right? They were very militaristic. And he thought that the military at the lead and growing the armed forces and then also fighting a couple of key wars would be the essence of how he would unite these states together and create what you now know of as Germany. And he also heavily supported the Prussian monarch at the time, who was named William, or in German you say Wilhelm I, who was a part of the very, 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 very big and powerful Hohenzollern family, all right? And this is him right here with his really bad haircut. Now, William I is going to be good stuff. His son, on the other hand, is the worst, all right? But now we have to answer ourselves, what are they going to do? How are they going to pull this off? And how they're going to pull it off is because Prussia is going to attempt to expand by annexing or taking control of neighboring German states, right? All those little areas that were in the dark green on that first map of the German Confederation, he wants to start gobbling up all those territories basically one at a time, or using very large wars to do so, right? But you have to figure out ways to annex them, which means that you're doing it without violence, okay? Using maybe a war to inspire some of them to join you, or like not necessarily vice versa, but that's basically it, right? He wants to attempt to expand by annexing or taking control of those German states, right? Getting from this blue into this much larger multicolored area right here. But the question you have to ask yourself is, how is he going to do this, right? How is he going to convince all these different people to be a part of this new growing state? Because it's a little bit silly to sit here and think that every single person in there wants to be a part of this new idea that you have, right? Well, it all comes down to a series of wars. And I'm going to clip in a flip from last year that I used to record and talk about all this stuff. It's a very good quality one. Like I said, you can break this flip up a little bit if you want to do some of it now and then some of it before your test on Monday. You're more than welcome to do so. But I would highly suggest also working on that study guide today, okay? Do not bother the sub. Do not let me hear that you're not doing things for this class. You have plenty of work to get done. I will see y'all soon. Y'all have a good one.
He's not attacking those places. He's not attacking the German states and bringing them in by force. He's attacking other people, making those German states feel like they're safer and better off with Prussia, right? So the very first war that he fights is this war known as the Second Schleswig War, right? Now, when you say these two places, it's called Schleswig and Holstein, right? So here's the idea behind it, all right? So we're going to zoom in on this map really quick. But there was two, like the countries involved are Prussia, Austria, and Denmark, right? So Denmark controlled these two provinces after the Congress of Vienna. The two provinces are called Schleswig and Holstein. Say it with me now. Schleswig and Holstein. Say it with me one more time. Schleswig and Holstein. Those two places spoke German, but were controlled by the Danish king in Denmark. And Denmark decided that they wanted to write a new constitution that would bring Schleswig and Holstein into their kingdom permanently. But Bismarck's like, no, no, no. They speak German. They do German things. They are a German group. We want them to be with us. So he decides to convince Austria, who also speaks German and who also has German culture, to go to war against Denmark to make Schleswig and Holstein want to join with Prussia and Austria, right? And they go in, and in 9 months, Prussia and Austria win this war. Duh, because they're really, really big, and also because the entire time Prussia has been building up its military, and they've always been a very strong military power. So they win this war very quickly, and Schleswig becomes a part of Prussia, and Holstein becomes a part of Austria. Now you've got an issue, and Bismarck's like sitting there, he's tapping his feet, and he's like, so I got Schleswig. But now I gotta get Holstein, right? So, because he doesn't like the fact that Austria has Holstein. But here's the problem. Do you want to directly go to war with Austria necessarily? They've been around for a really long time. But the thing about it is he decides, I'm gonna make some of these other German states think Austria is attacking us, right? And so he threatens Austria and says Austria is trying to instigate another war. And what ends up happening is then the Austro-Prussian War breaks out, right? About a year and a half after the Second Schleswig War, the Austro-Prussian War breaks out. Because what he wants to do is he wants to go to war with Austria, beat them quickly, and he wants to convince a bunch of these other German territories in the north to join up with Prussia, right? See what I'm talking about? At no point is Otto von Bismarck declaring war on any of these German-speaking principalities. He's declaring war on other people that kind of control them, trying to convince them to come and join this new beautiful idea that it will be Germany one day, right? He's like, look at us, German principalities. Prussia is the group you want to join. You want to be with us. You want to see Germany happen. We all speak the same language. We share the same culture. Come and join us. We'll protect you, right? And he does this successfully in the Austro-Prussian War as well. About a year and a half later, this bad boy only lasts 7 weeks, right? Prussia is able to enter into this war and just smack Austria in the mouth. Austria didn't really want to be in the war very much in the first place. Holstein was very far away from them. They didn't really necessarily need it at all. They also weren't in this trade customs union that the Prussians had called the Zollverein, so it didn't really make much sense for them financially. And also because the Germans had a new weapon, right? So this gun is a massive thing that turns the tide of the weapon. Honors kids, you need to write this gun down. The Western Civ kids, you're going to need to be able to reference it. But it's called the Dreisse needle gun. So this gun, Prussian soldiers had it, while Austrians still had muskets, right? Muskets take a long time to load. You got to have the gun, you got to pour the powder in, you got to ramrod it down, you got to put the bullet in, you got to ramrod it down. You got to take the paper, you got to put that in, you got to ramrod it down. And then you got to pull it up and shoot it. And the best Austrian soldiers in the world could fire maybe 2 shots a minute using a musket. But the Prussians, showing their industrial nature and their military nature, had a scientist in their place or in their country that actually invented this gun, and his name was Dreisse. And Dreisse invented a thing called the needle gun. This is a semi-automatic breech-loading gun. So instead of turning the gun up and pouring everything down the barrel, you see this little bolt right here? You would kick that up and pull it, and then slide the bullet in through the bottom of the barrel. Click, got it, bang! And then you would just do that over and over and over again. An untrained Prussian soldier with a Dreisse needle gun could fire about 6 shots a minute, while the best trained Austrian soldier could only fire 2 shots a minute with his musket. So the Prussians are going to use this technology to overwhelm the Austrian soldiers, and they're also not going to force Austria to pay war reparations. They're going to keep them on their side. They're going to be like, look, just go mind your own business. And they do. Austria leaves them alone. They move on. And now this is what Prussia has created. They call it the North German Confederation, right? So they were like, no more German Confederation, North German Confederation. And so they create this big new district up top. But as you can see, there's this dinky little orange area down here that they got to get control of, right? Now here's the issue with the orange area. The orange area is called Bavaria. And they have a religious divide, right? They got to figure out how are you going to recycle Bavaria, this last big speaking German area, into your empire when they don't really want to come in there with you because they're not the same faith, right? Okay, so it's just to keep in mind, the Reformation is still throwing kinks into a lot of stuff, right? So you got to understand that this entire area of the North German Confederation were Protestant. Bavarians were very wealthy, but they were also very Catholic. So they didn't want to join up with the North German Confederation, which was a Protestant majority. They were like, look, we'll just keep being Bavaria. We got castles and pretty stuff and all this other money. And they've had a king for a long time before that named Crazy Ludwig and all this other stuff, who actually built a castle that is actually designed, was the inspiration for the Walt Disney castle. It's called Neuschwanstein. It's the one thing, like this castle, I'm not even kidding, is the one word in German that Mr. Wooderson knows, right? So the Neuschwanstein castle was in Bavaria, and it's just kind of a good image of like Bavaria was very, very Catholic and very, very wealthy, right? So they didn't want to necessarily join the German, North German Confederation immediately. So they've got to figure out how can I get these guys to join up with us without going and fighting them. And what they decide to do, get someone to declare war on you that they also don't like that much. Because the enemy of my enemy is my friend, right? So who is the enemy of Bavaria? The French, right? So because remember, German speakers and French people aren't getting along right now ever since Napoleon took them over. When Napoleon comes in and enforces French culture on the German speakers, they start to heavily resent them. And so we got to figure out a way to get France to declare war on us so Bavaria will be like, don't fight them, that's not nice, and then join up with you, right? And they do this successfully because the Franco-Prussian War breaks out and it lasts for about 9 months, and it's against that guy Napoleon III, Napoleon's nephew, right? So what ends up going down, though, is Prussia ends up winning and overwhelms France completely, and it all started over a text message, basically, over a telegram. Because it was like this whole crazy thing with, there was a, Spanish, vacancy on their throne, so let me put it to you this way. Here's how Otto von Bismarck pulls this off, right? Otto von Bismarck pulls it off by trying to figure out a way to convince France to declare a war on the North German Confederation. Spain, their king, died with no heirs, right? So they had a succession crisis. The person that was about to take over the Spanish throne was a dude by the name of Leopold, right? Leopold was cousins with Wilhelm I, the Prussian king, right? And so basically, Napoleon III didn't want to be surrounded on both sides by people loyal to Germany, and especially as the North German Confederation was growing. So what he does is he sends a telegram to Wilhelm I saying, hey, tell your cousin not to take the throne in Spain so we can avoid war and things like that. Wilhelm sends a telegram back to Napoleon III. but it gets intercepted by Bismarck. And Bismarck changes the telegram to make it look as if Wilhelm blew Napoleon III off and was like, get out of here, Frenchie. And what ends up happening is Napoleon III, who is now so insulted and it gets printed all over newspapers and sent all over Europe, feels embarrassed and declares this war. And it's the Franco-Prussian War. That telegram was called the Ems telegram, right? So the Franco-Prussian War breaks out 9 months and Napoleon III loses big time, right? Mostly due to the fact that France had not nearly as intense of an infrastructure, their military wasn't as strong, and also their technology wasn't as good. But this is the telegram that was like sent back and forth that started the entire war, right? That's the telegram that Otto von Bismarck edited to make it look like Wilhelm I, the Prussian king, was talking junk about Napoleon III, the French emperor, right? Like so, and that is going to be the thing that ends up starting the war. And this right here is actually a picture of Napoleon III and Otto von Bismarck sitting together because the one big battle that they actually fought against each other was called the Battle of the Sedan, and Bismarck like wiped out all of his forces and stuff like that. So that's them sitting together. But when that actually happened, what's going to end up going down is that the French people are going to get so mad that like Napoleon III lost this battle and embarrassed them and all this stuff that they're going to kind of barricade themselves in. And I'll talk about this menu in class a little bit when we get there. But in the long run, the Franco-Prussian War breaks out of 9 months and a bunch of French people had to eat zoo animals. So like, okay, I'll just tell you now. So what ends up going down is Otto von Bismarck beats Napoleon III at a very large battle in the Franco-Prussian War called the Battle of the Sedan, right? Well, Paris and France, being very Paris and France-like, say, well, he's not our king anymore. And they decide to, like, just make him, force him out. And they're like, we're not ruled over by Napoleon III anymore. And so they create a barricaded society inside of Paris. And Paris refuses to surrender. So here come the Prussians. The Prussians come in, surround the city of Paris, and they're like, look, we're not going to kill a bunch of women and children. So we're going to wait until you decide to surrender. And so they blockaded the city of Paris. Well, this is going to cause Paris to run out of a lot of food. And so what they end up doing is Paris, being the French, decide that they refuse to surrender until they absolutely have to. So to find food, the Parisians went to the zoo and started eating the zoo animals, right? So like, as you can see, the hors d'oeuvre right there is rats and sardines. And then right down here, you can see that they're eating a consommé of elephant. They're eating kangaroo. They're eating anything they can have just so they don't have to surrender to the Prussians, right? But what ends up going down, though, they eventually surrender because they actually basically are going to starve. And now you got yourself a German Empire, right? Because Bavaria joins up with the Germans, and you have the birth of the German Empire. Wilhelm I, is a very last little, we don't like you to the French, decides that they were going to become a country in the Hall of Mirrors at the Palace of Versailles. So ironically enough, Germany became a country in the Palace of Versailles, which was a dramatic insult to the French. And Wilhelm took on the title of Kaiser, or Emperor, of all German states after winning that war against France, and they became a country in 1871, right? And so this event, where you can see Wilhelm I and Otto von Bismarck standing there in the crowd, and everyone's saluting the new German Emperor, Wilhelm I, Kaiser Wilhelm I, this can help lead to a big world war that's going to happen in the next unit. But I'll see y'all soon. Y'all have a great weekend. Enjoy yourselves. I'll talk to y'all soon. Study hard and kick this test butt, all right? Y'all have a good one.